What is the Australian government? To start, we must first answer two questions. The first being, what is Australia? So there's this huge ancient island smack bang in the middle of the tectonic plate. People have been living on it for potentially 70,000 years, we think. These people virtually terraformed this continent through the use of wildfires, and from then on lived pretty harmoniously with the ecosystem they cultivated, believing their responsibility to be the caretaking of it. These people lived in a hunter-gatherer style society with a ludicrously long and rich history that was almost all recorded orally. They saw no need to further force their surroundings to bend to their whims like in other parts of the world. They lived in balance with nature and were perfectly content to bask in the infinite beauty of the wild land that they called home. Then about 250 years ago, some people on another island, all the way on the other side of the world, who didn't give a fuck about living harmoniously with anything, let alone nature, had an empire. They were the Britons from the British Isle, and their empire was called the British Empire. It was a pretty big empire. So big they used to boast that the sun never set on it. Bunch of pompous twats. They also had fuckloads of boats and guns, and a penchant for taking shit from people without asking because they had fuckloads of boats and guns. Some people in Britain were aware of the existence of a largely unexplored landmass down at the bottom of the world, so they sent some dude called James Cook, who sailed boats good, to go take a boat, sail it around, and check it out. He had the bright idea to try to land on the east side for a change, and map it out while they were there. Great idea, dude. After they landed, James decided the whole place belonged to England, because none of the other people from the other side of the world where he was from had said it was theirs yet. Kind of awkward considering a bunch of people already lived there, and totally didn't need some pasty pantaloon-wearing weirdos to say the place they lived and took care of was suddenly someone else's property. Too bad, I guess, because those pasty pantaloon-wearing weirdos did it anyway. They were really good at that. Remember how I mentioned that Britain had a bunch of boats and guns? Yeah, well, they also have a bunch of prisoners because they really like to limit people's freedom on frequently tenuous pretense. Also, slave labor. They love that. Still do, honestly. This is all fine and dandy because they would just ship the extra prisoners to one of their kids named America. But a few years after Cook had been on his trip, Britain had gotten into an altercation with America over taxes and some other stuff. The thing is, though, America won. Said, fuck you, Dad. I'm not dealing with your shit anymore. And now Britain had nowhere to send its prisoners. And they quickly started to pile up with the prison infrastructure in Britain struggling to keep up with the intake. However, Britain also liked building colonies, and while it was sad it lost control of its biggest one, it saw potential in the mostly unexplored continent at the bottom of the world. I could go on in detail from here, but that would be a whole history of Australia. That's not really what this video is about. I might revisit it in a later one. To cut a long story short, a bunch of British dudes, prisoners in tow, arrived on 11 boats in 1788 to establish a British colony in a place that we now know as Sydney. Fast forward a couple hundred years and a lot of genocide, like a lot of genocide. It's now approaching the turn of the 20th century. Australia as a nation still doesn't exist and is separated into 6 different colonies, but a movement towards the idea of federation and bringing the 6 colonies together as part of a commonwealth was growing. The guy in charge of the New South Wales colony, this guy called Premier Henry Parkes, gave a speech to the public in 1889 to call for the need of a national government, although he died before it came to fruition in 1896. After a bunch of back and forth of different bills being proposed, the colonies finally agreed, and the bill calling for federation was sent back to Britain. They still had to ask for Daddy's approval. In March 1900, back in Britain, the bill calling for the Federation of Australia was put to their parliament. The bill was approved shortly after, and on the 5th of July the same year, Queen Victoria signed it into law. Officially, the Commonwealth of Australia didn't come about until January 1st, 1901, when the Queen's representative, which we call the Governor-General, some dude called Lord Hopetoun, just did whatever bureaucratic nonsense he was hired to do, and officially Australia, as a concept, came into being. So now we need to answer the second question. What is a government? A government is a system that is made up of a selection of the population that make decisions for the rest of the populace. Most governments function under a mode of operation that we know as a state. To steal the definition from Wikipedia, a state is a compulsory political organization with a centralized government that maintains a monopoly on the legitimate use of force within a certain geographical territory. Basically, we make the rules because we have an army, and if you break the rules, we'll beat you up. And the biggest rule is we're the only ones allowed to beat anyone up. Now that was a faster explanation, so with that all out of the way, what is the Australian government? Part 1, structure. The Australian government exists at 3 levels: local, state, and federal. Local councils are responsible for town planning, water, sewerage, waste collection, all that kind of stuff. State governments are responsible for the building/running of hospitals, building of roads, police, public transport, all the sort of slightly bigger projects. And then federal government responsible for the collection of taxes, distribution of public funds to state governments, immigration, trade, military, all the sort of higher level, more intense kind of things. Yeah. At the federal level, the government is a three-arm system that consists of the legislature, which is the parliament, executive, the Queen and others, and judiciary, which is the High Court and federal courts. Honestly, the only really important one to understand here is the legislative branch. The executive branch is mostly just bullshit to do with the Queen and the Governor General, and judiciary is just bureaucratic court stuff. Not that they don't do anything, but the average person has virtually no impact on these institutions, so I'm going to focus on the ones that we at least get a say in. So how is Parliament structured? The Australian Parliament is based on what's called the Westminster system, with some American characteristics. Basically, the Parliament is separated into three categories: the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the Queen. The Queen is represented by the Governor-General, who she technically appoints, but done so on the advice of the Prime Minister. The Governor-General exercises the Queen's executive authority, which really just means they sign off on legislation that has already passed through Parliament to make it officially law. Although they can refuse, they'll simply be sacked and replaced with a new Governor-General. The role is entirely for ceremonial purposes. But how does legislation get that far in the first place? First, a bill is introduced in the lower house, the House of Representatives. They have a discussion and maybe make some changes. Then if a majority vote in favor of the bill, it gets passed to the upper house, the Senate. In the Senate, the same process occurs, and if a majority vote in favor of the bill, it gets passed to the Governor-General to sign off on, and then it's a law. A few things to note. For a bill to be passed into law, it must be identical in both houses. Bills can also be introduced in the Senate if they're to do with anything that isn't money or taxes. Both houses have a representative whose job it is to oversee proceedings in the chamber. In the House of Reps, this person is the Speaker, and in the Senate, this person is the President. Both these houses are composed with the government sitting on one side and the opposition directly across. Minor parties and independents make up what's called the crossbench. This helps in how the House votes on a bill. When a decision is made, it's put to a vote based on voices. Votes are cast by members saying A or no. The Speaker in the House of Reps or President in the Senate decide the result. If the result is challenged by more than one member of Parliament, then a division is called. In a division, the members of Parliament move to whatever side of the room the people they are voting with are on. Since most of the time members of the government and the opposition vote along their party lines, it is the minors and independents who move from their positions to indicate their vote. Hence the term crossbench, because they literally have to cross the bench. Each state also has a lower and upper house that functions very similarly to the federal parliament, and members are elected in virtually the same manner. But how are the houses different, and how are members of each elected? House of Reps. Members are elected to the House of Reps from 150 electorates. Electorates are single-member constituencies, drawn up to be around the same population as each other. Whatever party or coalition of parties has the majority of members in the House of Reps gets to form government, with the leader of the party becoming the Prime Minister. Members are elected for 3-year terms, and votes are counted using what we call preferential voting, where you number 1 for your first choice, 2 for your second choice, and then so on and so on. If your first candidate is not elected and no other candidate has a majority, your vote then may be re-examined for its next preference. This allows minor parties to receive votes and not be considered wasted like they would in a first-past-the-post, winner-takes-all system like America uses. To make it simpler, when a federal election is called, you vote for a candidate to represent your local area. If a majority of candidates that are elected are members of the same party, then that party gets to be the government. The Senate. The way of voting for the Senate is similar, but there's less seats to go around, and the Senate majority doesn't determine the federal government. However, the Senate is still very important. There are a total of 76 seats in the Senate, 6 from each state, 2 from each territory, and the first 3 senators elected from a state serve a 6-year term, and the last 3 serve a 3-year term. Unlike in the UK, the Australian Senate has the power to reject all bills from the lower house. Elections for Senate were originally done by a first-past-the-post system, but is now changed to what we call optional preferential voting. Sounds complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. So what it means is that you number your first choice as 1, your second choice as 2, and so on and so on. And like it is in the House of Reps, if your first choice doesn't get in, then your vote will be tallied for your second choice, and so on. But with optional preferential voting, if you just number your first vote, it will still count as long as you're voting above the line. If you're voting below the line, you need to number at least 6, otherwise it won't count. But what does that mean? Well, on the ballot paper itself, at the top of the page are political parties, and you can vote for a party, and they will distribute the votes to their candidates on your behalf. On the bottom of the page, separated by a literal line, are the individual candidates, which you can vote for directly. Voting for parties is above the line, voting for individuals is below the line. Pretty straightforward, yeah? Both ways are perfectly fine ways of casting your vote. Above the line is easier, and below the line gives more flexibility. So change in scenery, because I realized while editing that I basically lost all the footage to this part. So I just have to re-record it real quick to try to get this out on time. But let's go. So I just explained the basics of Parliament and how it functions. So let's now look at the players. Part 2, the minor parties. I'm just going to be going over the federal level parties that actually hold seats. If I went into all the different state level parties and parties without sitting members, it'd take so long and be so boring. United Australia Party. So you've probably seen at least one of these god-awful ads come up in your TV or YouTube at some point during the last few months. If you haven't, what is your secret? Please tell me. Yellow background, overly simplistic talking points, same 5 actors. A lot of the time there's this sort of slug man just saying bullshit at you. These are the work of United Australia Party. That is Clive Palmer's party. He's the slug man. They were founded in 2013, but have been through a few name changes. And in 2016, they actually were deregistered after they lost all of their seats. They're back as of 2018 under the original name, and Clive's still firmly at the helm. But who is Clive? So he's basically Australia's fatter, dumber Donald Trump. He is, or at least was, in a legal battle with Dee Snider over using a ripoff of "We're Not Gonna Take It" in his political ads. He's a meme, but not a good one. He's a mining billionaire who keeps trying, occasionally successfully, to enter politics in blatant attempts to bolster his own business interests. But he campaigns on the idea that all other politicians are just in it for themselves, and Clive's the one who's going to stick up for you. He's gonna take it to the man for you. Despite the public knowledge that he siphoned hundreds of millions out of his nickel mine in Queensland when it went under, and then, didn't pay his workers, and then the state government had to step in and pay his workers to the tune of like $70 million, and he still hasn't paid them back. Yeah. But, he's not in politics to get himself ahead. That's crazy. It's Clive. Clive's going to look after you. Clive himself was once actually a sitting politician, but he had an abysmal parliamentary attendance rate. One time he was actually in Canberra, he fell asleep in the chamber. It's not a joke. There's a photo of it. I'll put it up on the screen. It's Jesus Christ. The United Australia Party does have one seat at the moment, that of Brian Burston, who's a guy who was originally a One Nation candidate, but he left the party over an argument with Pauline Hanson to do with tax cuts. Pauline Hanson's One Nation. Now, a lot of people already know who Pauline Hanson and what her party is, but let's just have a quick rundown anyway. Pauline Hanson, originally running as an endorsed Liberal candidate in the 1996 federal election, made a bunch of racist comments to a local newspaper in Ipswich, and as a result, she was disendorsed. But the ballot papers had already been printed, so when election day came, she was still on the ballot paper as the Liberal candidate. And probably because of this, she was elected, and she sat as an independent. Hanson formed her own party in 1997, dubbing it Pauline Hanson's One Nation. The name in Hanson didn't last very long. She was kicked from the party in 2000, and the name changed to just One Nation. However, Pauline rejoined in 2013 and was re-elected leader in 2015, and now the old name's back. I could outline their specific policies and talk about those, but I don't give enough of a shit about pretending like they're acting in any form of good faith, or that they're even anything but totally intellectually dishonest. One Nation are a group of demagogic scum. Absolute cretins who throw marginalized groups under the bus just to score political points. They are an intentionally controversial entity that is being given constant oxygen by the mainstream news that just cover their never-ending scandals and shenanigans. Like that time recently where 2 of their members got caught out in a sting by Al Jazeera trying to get money from the NRA to overturn Australia's gun control, and they came up with a genius excuse that they were drunk. One Nation are a laughingstock to most Australians, and for good reason. They're a pack of bumbling idiots, only in politics for themselves. They claim to be standing up for white working-class Australians in their own rhetoric, yet it's all virtue-signaling nonsense. They're just a bunch of racist morons who drum up discontent from alienated racists to line their own pockets at the expense of whoever the current target is. In the 90s it was Asians, and now it's Muslims. They flip-flop from whatever group angry bogans in Queensland are like the most angry at the moment. However, we shouldn't underestimate the power of their rhetoric, as the fascistic views that they encourage and propagate lead to real damage to actual people in this country. Currently sitting in Parliament for One Nation are 2 senators, Pauline Hanson as a senator for Queensland, and Peter Peter G in Western Australia, who took over from Rod Cullington after he was disqualified for being a crook, which is a common thing with One Nation, actually. Australian Conservatives. Established as an activist group by Liberal Senator Cory Bernardi in 2016, it was turned into a political party in 2017 when Bernardi left the Liberal Party because it wasn't reactionary enough for him. They're a hard-right Christian conservative party led by Bernardi, a guy who doesn't believe in climate change, thinks it's wrong for the government to pay for the funerals of asylum seekers, seems to have a seething resentment of Muslim people, which he has proclaimed on several occasions, believes that permitting same-sex marriage would lead to legalized polygamy and bestiality, consistently voted against marriage equality, calls people in favor of allowing legal abortion pro-death, and has publicly stated that a program designed to help LGBT kids feel safe at school bullies heterosexual children. I could go on for a while about how fucked Bernardi is, but I'll leave it there. Fuck him and his shitty party. Liberal Democratic Party. Formed in 2001, they're a right-wing libertarian party who believes in free markets without regulation, which is to say they're total dumbasses. I might do a whole thing on right-wing libertarian ideology because the whole position is ridiculous in theory and dangerous in practice. The short of it is that they're just a bunch of rich dickheads who don't like paying taxes and base their whole worldview around that. Everything good that happens is because of the market, and everything bad is because of the government. The Liberal Democrats also want to privatize literally every public service we have, which just makes me shiver thinking about what the result of that would be. It's like, it's sociopathic. It's fucked. They have one seat in the Senate. Darren Hinch's Justice Party. Another party with just a single Senate seat, founded and led by this guy called Darren Hinch. They run on a single issue of justice reform, but prioritizing jail sentences over rehabilitation. Yeah, it's not good. Katter's Australian Party. Another single seat party, but this time their sole members from the House of Reps, formed and ran by this guy.
You know, people are entitled to their sexual proclivities. I mean, let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned. But I ain't spending any time on it because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
They get quite a bit of cash and donations from gas, firearms, mining, and taxi companies. So much else to say. Centre Alliance. God, it's hard to say that with a straight face. Centre Alliance is the party of a particular political hack called Nick Xenophon. Originally, the party was named Nick Xenophon Team before changing to SA Best, and then recently to their current name, Centre Alliance. Xenophon originally ran as an independent, largely on the issue of removing poker machines in South Australia, which hasn't really gone anywhere. They've had moderate success campaigning on a centrist platform. Basically, they just claim that the two major parties are shit and we need to find a balance between them, which even if it was a good position to hold, which it's not, Xenophon is completely full of shit as his party is made up of almost exclusively ex-Liberal staffers, and they vote with the Liberal Party on almost every piece of legislation. They're not centrists, they're cynical political opportunists who lie to the public to claw seats away from the major parties. They have 2 seats in the Senate and 1 in the House of Reps. However, Xenophon himself no longer holds a seat. Fraser Anning's Conservative Nationalist Party. Fascists. They're fascists. Like, that's not hyperbole. This isn't me calling people I disagree with Nazis. Anning and his band of fuckwits are fascists. Their stated policies include Australia to be an English-speaking, predominantly European Christian society. Basically, they just want to bring back the White Australia policy. Traditional family values, whatever the fuck that means. And they also want to ban black and Muslim immigration to Australia, which just, like, if you... like, you can't get more cartoonishly fascist than that. Fraser Anning only got 19 primary votes in the 2016 election, but because Malcolm Roberts from One Nation was found ineligible to be a senator because he's a fucking dumbass, the votes were recounted, and because of preferencing, Anning was elected. In 2018, he made his maiden speech to the Senate, bumbling, moronic, and spoken like a 10-year-old giving a presentation in class they had barely prepared for. In it, he called for a final solution to Muslim immigration, drawing ire from anyone with more than half a brain, but apparently not from a lot of people in the Liberal Party. Ooh, he shook his hand. It's not good. Like, fuck, Jesus Christ. Tony Abbott, why? More recently, he gave comment on the Christchurch shooting, where he blamed the massacre not on the white supremacists who committed the terrorist attack, or the media elements and politicians who propagated his rhetoric, but on the victims, saying essentially that if they didn't want to be shot by racist lunatics, they should never have moved to another country in the first place. In response to this, a teenager cracked an egg on him at one of his neo-Nazi rallies. And again, I don't say that lightly. There were literal neo-Nazis in attendance. He promptly punched the teen twice and then was held to the ground by half a dozen bogans in board shorts and thongs. The teen, not Anning. He also spent more money flying him and his family around at the taxpayer's expense last year than any other politician, frequently billing the taxpayer to attend far-right rallies around the country. So he's a Nazi using public money to fly around and hang out with his Nazi mates. Nice one. If you want to read something fucked, just go look at his family history on Wikipedia. Oh, it's like just his whole Wikipedia page is like a fucking trip, dude. Fraser Anning's Conservative Nationals Party has one seat in the Senate, that being Anning's. The Greens. The largest of the minor parties, formed in 1992 from over a dozen environmental action groups from around the country. They're probably the furthest left you can get in terms of parties in this country that have any chance of actually winning seats. The Greens base themselves on 4 key principles: ecological sustainability, grassroots democracy, social justice, peace and non-violence. They cop a lot of shit from the News Corp run mainstream media in this country, but they're pretty consistent in what they push for in Parliament, and most of their policies are pretty decent, even if some of them are a little bit unrealistic, just because they're trying to one-up Labour a lot of the time on their own policy positions. They advocate for things like banning of live animal exports, mass rollout of renewable energy, opposing new coal mines being built, expanding public transport, voluntary euthanasia, expanding access to safe and legal abortion, increasing company tax rates, all the good stuff. The only real problem with the Greens at the moment is a lot of the original members are stepping down and being replaced by inner city yuppies just interested in a seat in Parliament. However, you could argue most politicians are just after a parliamentary seat and the cushy benefits it brings. But even that in mind, it doesn't really affect the overall goals and policy positions of the Greens as a whole. They're also one of the few voices in government willing to address climate change as the ecological catastrophe it's shaping up to be, rather than what most parties do, which is just to pretend like it isn't an issue or it isn't happening at all while collecting those sweet mining industry donations. The Nationals. Originally known as the Australian Country Party when it was founded in 1920, the Nationals are a conservative party whose base is comprised mostly of farmers and voters from country towns. The whole thing they believe in is that if rural Australia is doing well, then it will positively affect everywhere else in the country. And that's not really a bad position to have, I guess, but the problem is that it's just posturing. They don't give a shit about rural Australia. They don't give a shit about Australia in general. They only care about lining their own pockets. They formed a coalition with the Liberal Party in 2008, which means that all the seats the Nationals get are now counted for the Liberals. This is the only reason the Liberals have been able to keep forming government. They're also some of the most blatantly corrupt, sycophantic shitheads in Parliament, and that's saying a lot. For example, there was that time the leader of the Nationals and Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Barnaby Family Values Joyce, got caught out setting up bullshit jobs in his campaign for his young mistress. Basically just stealing from the public to fund his affair with a woman nearly 20 years younger than him. Or do you remember that other time with Joyce, where mining billionaire Gina Reinhardt literally tried to give him a giant check as a thank you? Yeah, nothing shady about that. Since then, Joyce has left the National Party. Now Michael McCormack is Deputy Prime Minister and Nationals leader. Or just ignoring Joyce, do you remember that time, the end of last year? How the worst ecological catastrophe in New South Wales history occurred when the Murray-Darling River was poisoned and 1 million fish were killed because corporate farmers, with the help from the Nationals and New South Wales Liberals, were stealing water from the river to store in their own dams and then sold back that water to the government when the water levels were low. Literally just blatantly laundering money, but using the most important river system in the state to do it. To make matters worse, they were so incompetent that it fucked up the entire river. No one has been made to answer for this disaster, and likely no one ever will. I could go on for hours about the scandals and blatant corruption of the National Party, but I think I've said enough for now because it's time for Part 3, the major parties. The Liberal Party, originally formed in 1944 out of the ashes of the United Australia Party, not the Clive Palmer one. Its primary goal was to oppose the Labour government at the time. They gained their original base of support from business owners, as the Australian bourgeois hated Labour for the whole standing up for working people thing. Nowadays, it's more or less the same, except now the Liberals get the backing of multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations. They take donations from the scummiest of scum in the world, and the Liberals always pay them back in kind. The Liberals are one of the 2 major parties and currently the one in government. However, like I said before, they do not hold a majority by themselves. Since 2008, they've been in a coalition with the National Party. With their help, the Liberals hold a slim majority. They're branded as centre-right, but in recent years, a hard-right faction of the party has become more emboldened, recently culminating last year in a series of leadership spills that led their leader and the Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, to step down. He won the spills, however, he left the party in politics because he saw the Liberal ship was sinking, and sinking fast. In the face of this, many other high-profile, moderate, liberal politicians announced they would quit politics after the next election. 4 in total. Those being Chris Pine, Stephen Kyobo, Stephen Kobo, Stephen something or other. Julie talked to the whiteboard bishop, and Kelly O'Dwyer. Turnbull's challenger to the throne was living potato Peter Dutton, an ex-cop from Queensland whose claims to fame include attacking businesses for supporting marriage equality, boycotting the public apology to the Aboriginal people for the stolen generation, being voted worst health minister in 25 years by Australian Doctor magazine, and he once accidentally texted a journalist saying she was a mad fucking witch. The text was meant to be sent to a colleague. He's basically the figurehead for the conservative arm of the Liberal government. Economically, the Liberals follow along the ideological lines of classical liberalism, which in practicality amounts to tax cuts and free public money for large corporations, the gutting of social services, destroying the environment for profit, and selling public assets to their friends and donors. Socially, they're generally on the conservative side. They don't give a shit about gays, women, immigrants, refugees, the poor, or anyone who doesn't donate to them, basically. They'll try and counter this point with how marriage equality was enacted under their government. However, they neglect to mention the fact that Labour and the Greens have introduced many bills over the years, and the Liberals shot them all down. They only ended up passing the bill at the end of a year-long slog of delay tactics, after putting it to a non-binding postal vote, while also doing everything in their power to sway that vote to no, and they still lost anyway. This is also to say nothing of the anti-LGBT propaganda campaigns that went on during that time that made people's validity of existence a subject of national debate. They also seem to have a problem with women in their party, as they keep getting sexually harassed and intimidated out of it, which is, not good for obvious reasons. The Liberal Party also like to claim that they're the superior economic managers of the two major parties, but every fact and figure proves this to be false. In 1983, the Labour government took over from the Liberals, and economy ranked 20th in the world. In 1996, Labour then handed over to Liberal, and economy ranked 6th in the world. In 2007, Howard's Liberal government passed back to Labour an economy that was 10th in the world. And then in 2013, Gillard's Labour handed the Liberals the best performing economy in the world. As of 2015, Turnbull's Liberals had an economy ranked 10th in the world, and was deteriorating further. We were also ranked last out of 34 OECD countries, where we remain today. The Libs and their supporters will tout the budget surplus under the Howard government as a point of pride and proof of their superior economic savviness. Ignoring the fact that manageable deficits are considered better for economies than a surplus, the surplus wasn't even Howard's doing. He basically won the prime ministerial equivalent of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire when a resource boom occurred during his government. But what did him and his government do in the face of this boom? They absolutely squandered it. They didn't do what Norway did and set up a sovereign fund. No, they built fuck all infrastructure, invested barely any of the money they got back into the country. But what they did do was allow multinational mining corporations to ship a dizzying amount of resources overseas and sell them, with Australia seeing barely anything, if anything, back in tax. And the tax money that was actually collected was wasted on middle-class welfare, like the 50% capital gains discount, which lasts to this day and is largely the cause of our current housing bubble, which has locked first home buyers out of the market and is looking to cause an economic crisis when it bursts. Because the subsequent Liberal governments didn't give a shit and then made it worse by introducing things like negative gearing. The Howard government was the most profligate government in Australian history, and that isn't hyperbole. That is a measurable fact. The amount of money that was sent overseas from our resource boom that we never saw a cent of comes in at an estimated $1 trillion. Yet they're the party of strong economic management. For a more recent example of the Liberal Party fucking over the country as a whole to benefit their donors, let's look at what happened when they took over from Labour in 2013. Just before this point, Australia was in a very unique position in the world. We were able to navigate through the global financial crisis largely unscathed thanks to Labour policies, but we still had pretty shit internet compared to most other developed nations. However, we now had the opportunity to do something about it, and we were pretty much the only country in the world at that time with the capability to build a fibre network. So when Labour was still in power, they had started the National Broadband Network project, which would see everyone in Australia given fibre optic internet connection right to their home, given everyone speeds of 100 megabytes a second, and put Australia in one of the leading positions to take advantage of the emerging digital economy, granting us absolutely ludicrous returns on investment. Like I mentioned, Labour lost the election in 2013, shortly after starting the project, and the Liberals said, "Fuck that, how will poor old Rupert Murdoch be able to compete with streaming services if Australians have access to high-speed internet infrastructure? Didn't you think of his monopoly? Don't be so selfish." Well, they didn't say that, but it's the reason they basically just sabotaged the whole thing. After all, the day before the Liberals announced their plan for the NBN, the communication minister at the time and future Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, met with Murdoch at Foxtel offices in Sydney. Nothing suspicious about that. Their plan for the MVN was 10 times slower than Labour's, used fibre to the node technology, which industry experts call mechanical puke, and they also lied about how much it was going to cost, repeatedly. Now we have worse internet than Kenya. That's not a joke. It's not like, I'm not exaggerating. We literally have worse internet on average than Kenya. It's not good. Another of the Liberal Party's recent achievements have been how they defunded healthcare by about $60 billion. And hey, what do you know? In that same budget, they were able to give out $60 billion in tax cuts and subsidies to multinational mining companies. How convenient. This is just absolutely indicative of what the Liberal Party is. They're a group of corrupt sycophants that would rather see people suffer and die than to have their rich mates contribute their fair share to our society. One other recent endeavour was how the Liberals gutted the CSIRO, which basically meant that every scientist not researching new mining technologies got the boot. But what were the other scientists working on? Well, a lot of them were working on solar energy and battery storage technology, projects that had been in the works for years. Projects that would have been worth trillions in the coming decade, as the world looked shifted to move towards renewable energy. The Liberals saw that and said, what? We don't... No, fuck off. So those scientists then took their research that we funded and got jobs with Tesla. So now Tesla owns the fruits of our taxpayer-funded research into renewables. Because the Liberal Party are moronic dickheads with a pathological obsession with fossil fuel. Fan-fucking-tastic. But that's enough about the past. What about the present? At present, the Liberal leader and current Prime Minister is Scott Morrison, a begrudging compromise between Turnbull and Dutton, who symbolise the current rift in the Liberal Party, that of the Liberal Economics faction and the hard-right Conservative faction. The guy who brought a lump of coal into Parliament that one time and tried to say that Labour has a pathological fear of coal because they had the absolutely radical idea to want to invest in renewables and transition away from coal-powered electricity, like other nations have already been doing. The guy who voted against a banking royal commission 26 times and in 2013 was the one who launched Operation Sovereign Borders, the whole Stop the Boats thing, which the UNHCR expressed concerns that it violated human rights laws. And whoops, wouldn't you know, they were exactly right, and more. This endeavour is one that Morrison is immensely proud of, because who wouldn't be proud of locking up children and families for extended amounts of time, causing them psychological trauma that will last a lifetime? Or for the terrible crime of being forced into desperate circumstances and wishing to escape being brutally murdered in wars perpetrated and perpetuated by Australia and its allies. He's so proud of this accomplishment that he literally has a little boat trophy in his office with the words, "I stopped these," engraved on it. Cute. Some people might look at this and say, well, if they're so shit, why do they keep getting elected? The reason is fairly simple. The Liberal Party have the backing of the vast majority of the Australian media, most of which is owned by News Corp. In other words, Rupert Murdoch. You thought America was bad because a lot of people listen to Fox News and take it seriously? Try having your entire media landscape predominantly be Fox News. And the outlets that aren't owned by Rupert Murdoch pretty much just follow the agenda that News Corp sets, which is fucking terrifying. It's not so much that it's just the facts that are being intentionally misrepresented, although that is the case, like, so fucking frequently. It's that the media intentionally ignores so much of what is going on in this country. It's sickening. After all, that's the reason why the Liberals intentionally sabotaged our broadband network on behalf of Rupert. Because the Murdoch press always has their back during election cycles, churning out so many bullshit fluff pieces on why we need a Liberal government and how shit it would be if Labour were in charge. Speaking of, let's now talk about the Labour Party. They're the oldest political party in Australia, with their origins stretching back to Labour parties founded in the 1890s, before Australia had even federated. They were originally a democratic socialist party, but have given up that particular endeavour since failing to nationalise the banking industry in the 40s. They then lost the 1949 election and were stuck in opposition for 23 years. Labour, under the leadership of Gough Whitlam in 1967, switched to what remains their current national platform, that of social democracy. The Labour Party always had a left-right division, but this change split the Labour Party into actual left and right factions. If you don't know the difference between social democracy and democratic socialism, here's a quick rundown. Basically, democratic socialists believe in giving workers control of the means of production, which is socialism, through the use of legislation in a representative democracy, rather than the traditional socialist idea of seizing the means of production through revolution. Whereas social democrats believe in keeping private hands holding the means of production, which is capitalism, but seek to lower the exploitative effects that this has on the working class through the use of robust social services like healthcare, welfare, all that kind of stuff. Social democracy is a means of preserving capitalism and guarding against a worker uprising. After all, if you keep the working class happy with social services and opportunity of economic mobility, what reason do they have to overthrow the system? Labour, being a Labour Party, get their base of support largely from trade unions rather than corporations. So they have a vested interest in making sure the working class aren't getting brutally fucked over. Not to say that they're 100% representative of working class interests, or that corporate donors don't have an impact on party policy. But of the two major parties, they are without a doubt the superior choice. Here are some of the things that Labour support. Increased funding for hospitals, increased funding for public schools, an end to stagnant wages, Australia to be run on 50% renewable energy by 2030, free TAFE, investment in infrastructure that isn't just toll roads, closing tax loopholes and making multinationals pay the tax that they actually owe, tax cuts for working Australians, climate change action, investment in an Australian space agency, the establishment of an independent National Integrity Commission to eliminate government corruption. I could go on. They got there's a lot of policies. Go read them. Go read the policies. They're good policies. Sounds good, right? Yeah, because these are actually good ideas. Like, the Labour Party puts forward policies that the vast majority of Australians are actually in favour for. Most of their policies get a 70% approval rate when people aren't told what party that policy belongs to. Conversely, the Liberals get 20 to 30% approval for their policies. The only reason so many people dislike Labour so intensely is because of the fucking clown world view of reality that the mass media in this country have fabricated. They've perpetuated the myth that Labour are worse economic managers than Liberal, even though that's demonstrably false. Literally, it's the opposite. They perpetuate the myth that Labour, will always fuck up the national debt, Labour will put us into debt. But the thing is, when Liberal took over from Labour in 2013, the debt that Labour had accrued over the 6 years of government that it had at that point, Liberal doubled it in 5 months. It's fucking crazy. They also perpetuate the myth that Liberals giving rich cunts tax cut is good for the economy, and Labour investing in infrastructure is bad, even though investment in infrastructure statistically gives a far greater increase in economic activity than cutting taxes. This is not to say that Labour is perfect. Absolutely not. The problem with Labour is that the party is full of technocrat lawyers who are obsessed with maintaining the status quo rather than having an actual image of a future to strive toward. That is a problem. It gives the public no ideal to get behind, and it also delegates the role of politicians to that of problem solvers rather than society builders. Plus, I fundamentally disagree with the idea that workers shouldn't control the means of production, which is what Labour's current position is. Also, there's that thing where they're not good with refugees, but nobody in this country is. I mean, there's Greens, the Greens are alright. They're yeah, let's not fucking torture people in camps. And I guess Labour would want to, but so many Australians just fucking hate refugees and they're trying to appeal to them and it's not good. Just don't do that. Just fuck. Even with that in mind, Labour is infinitely better than Liberal in every respect. By all measures, the country runs better under a Labour government. If you take anything away from what I've said, it's that you shouldn't trust the mainstream media. Ever. They do not exist to inform you. They exist to distract you long enough to shove advertisement in your face while shifting the public discourse in favour of the views of the rich dickheads that own them. Despite the narrative the Australian media present, everything the Liberal Party claim they do, Labour does better and more. You may think I'm super biased and I'm not giving both sides equal consideration, and sure, I'm biased, but I'm definitely giving both sides equal consideration. It's just that I have a particular set of values, and as such, I'm more in favor of certain ideas. But what I'm in favor of is building a society that works for the needs of as many people as possible, grants people the most freedom to empower themselves, live life on their own terms, and doesn't fucking collapse from climate catastrophe because some multi-billionaire fuckwits didn't want to make slightly less money. But I did give both sides equal consideration. However, the facts and reality prove that one choice is better for the most amount of people. In conclusion, what is the Australian government? It's fucked. It's absolutely fucked. It's a hive of scum and villainy, home to some of the worst our society has to offer, and the decisions they make keep fucking up Australia's chance to be unequivocally the best fucking country in the world. But we can change this. If we stop letting ourselves be distracted and fooled by the professional bullshit artists on our TV, take a look at the actual facts and make informed decisions on what benefits us the most, the possibilities for what we can achieve are endless. Just research. It's not hard. Research just for a little bit. Read for 5 minutes. Just look at a Wikipedia article on something before you spout off your opinion in the comment section of a news article. Jesus Christ, so many people just believe so many things that just aren't true, and they don't take the 5 seconds required to go check if they are true. They just repeat them again. It's maddening. Just don't do that. Just read. Just do something, please. God, for the love of God. Fuck. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. That's it, I guess. Yeah. Thanks for watching my stupid YouTube video.